Marcus Wright stood at the edge of his property line, watching the sunrise paint the Colorado mountains in shades of amber and gold. At 52, his weathered hands trembled slightly as he gripped the wooden fence post that had stood for 30 years, the same post he and Sarah had installed during their first summer as newlyweds. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd chosen this spot, this moment, this morning when the world looked most beautiful, to say goodbye to it all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ranch stretched out before him like a faded photograph. 2,800 acres of rolling pasture that had once supported 300 head of cattle. Now maybe 40 scraggly steers wandered the far fields, their ribs showing through patchy coats. The bank notices stuffed in his kitchen drawer told the story better than any eulogy could. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in 6 weeks. Everything he and Sarah had built together would be auctioned off to the highest bidder, probably some development company from Denver looking to carve the land into suburban plots. Sarah had been gone 14 months now. Pancreatic cancer had taken her so quickly that Marcus still found himself setting 2 coffee cups each morning before remembering. The oncologist said she might have 6 months. She lasted 7 weeks after the diagnosis. 7 weeks of watching the strongest woman he'd ever known shrink into someone he barely recognized. Her laugh replaced by labored breathing, her quick wit dulled by morphine. The insurance money had covered the medical bills, barely. The grief had covered everything else, smothering his ability to work the land, to care for the animals, to maintain the machinery that kept a ranch running. Neighbors had offered help, but Marcus had always been too proud to accept charity. Now pride was all he had left, and it tasted bitter as week-old coffee. He'd written the letter the night before, sitting at Sarah's old writing desk in the study. 3 pages explaining his decision, asking forgiveness from the few family members who still kept in touch, leaving instructions for the animals. He'd sealed it in an envelope addressed to his brother David in Phoenix, though they hadn't spoken since Sarah's funeral. The letter sat now in his shirt pocket, next to the small revolver that had belonged to his father. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist that clung to the valley floor. Marcus knew he should get on with it. He'd already fed the horses and checked the water troughs one last time. The cattle would be fine until someone came looking for him, probably in a few days when he missed his appointment at the bank. By then, the decision would be made. The suffering ended. He'd chosen the old oak tree near the center of the property, the same tree where he'd proposed to Sarah 31 years ago. It seemed fitting somehow, though he couldn't quite explain why. The tree had watched over their happiness. Maybe it could witness his peace. Marcus pulled the revolver from his pocket, feeling its familiar weight. His father had carried it during the Korean War, brought it home, and never spoke of what he'd seen overseas. After his father's death, Marcus had kept it in a lockbox, never imagining he'd hold it with such purpose. His hands weren't shaking anymore. The decision had brought its own strange calm. He walked slowly toward the oak, boots crunching through frost-stiffened grass. The morning air carried the scent of pine and sage, smells that had always meant home. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals with effortless grace. Sarah had loved watching the hawks, said they reminded her that some things in this world were still wild and free. The tree's massive trunk showed the scars of decades' initials carved deep in the bark, branches broken and regrown, lightning strikes that had left black marks but hadn't brought it down. Marcus reached out and touched the rough bark where he'd carved their initials. So many years ago, MW plus SK forever. The letters had grown wider as the tree expanded, stretched but still readable. He sat down heavily, his back against the tree, legs stretched out in the grass. The revolver felt lighter now, almost weightless in his lap. He thought about Sarah's laugh, the way she'd snorted slightly when something really amused her. He thought about their wedding day, how beautiful she'd looked in her grandmother's dress, how her hands had trembled during the vows. He thought about the children they'd tried to have, the miscarriages that had broken her heart again and again until they'd finally stopped trying. The land had been their child instead. Every fence line, every pasture, every building they'd raised. Together, now it would die with him, sold off and carved up and turned into something unrecognizable. Maybe that was for the best. Maybe some things weren't meant to outlive their creators. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to feel Sarah's presence, tried to imagine her waiting for him somewhere beyond the morning light. The grief counselor the hospital had forced him to see had talked about stages of acceptance, about finding new purpose, about healing. What she hadn't understood was that some wounds weren't meant to heal. Some losses were too complete for recovery. A sound made him open his eyes. Faint, distant, almost lost in the whisper of wind through the grass. He held his breath, listening. There it was again, a muffled cry, so soft he might have imagined it. Marcus looked around, seeing nothing but empty pasture and the hawk still circling overhead. Probably just a coyote in the distance, or one of the steers caught in a fence. But the sound came again, and this time there was something human about it. A child's voice, thin and desperate, calling out words he couldn't quite make out. Marcus struggled to his feet, the revolver forgotten in the grass beside the tree. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the mountains in ways that made direction impossible to determine. He walked toward what he thought might be the source, an area about 50 yards from the oak tree, where the ground dipped slightly into a natural depression. The grass here was disturbed, trampled in places, with strange rectangular indentations. In the earth that looked almost like ... Marcus stopped cold. Graves. Someone had dug graves in his field, but these weren't old graves, weathered and sunken with time. The earth was fresh, recently turned, with clods of dirt still loose around the edges. 7 rectangular depressions, each about the size of a child's coffin, arranged in a rough circle like some macabre ritual site. The crying came again, definitely. From beneath the ground now, multiple voices calling out in terror and desperation. Children's voices pleading for help, for air, for their mothers. Marcus dropped to his knees beside the nearest grave, pressing his ear to the earth. The sound was muffled, but unmistakable. Someone was buried alive down there. Without thinking, he began clawing at the dirt with his bare hands, fingernails splitting against stones and roots. The earth came away in chunks, revealing wooden boards. Underneath, a makeshift coffin or box, crudely constructed but solid enough to trap whoever lay inside. The cries grew louder as he worked, more urgent, mixed with the sound of small fists pounding against wood. His hands bled as he dug, but adrenaline had replaced despair. Purpose had driven out his death wish. There were children buried in his field, children who were still alive, still fighting for survival. Nothing else mattered now except getting them out. The first box came into view, rough pine boards nailed together, with small holes drilled in the top for air. Through the holes came the sound of sobbing, of a young voice calling, "Help me, please help me." Marcus grabbed a rock and began smashing at the wooden lid, splinters flying as the boards gave way. A pale face appeared in the opening. A boy, maybe 8 years old, with dark hair matted with sweat and dirt. His eyes were wide with terror. But when he saw Marcus, hope flooded his features. "Mister," he gasped, voice hoarse from screaming, "there are others. My sister, she's in the box next to mine. Please, you have to help her." Marcus reached down and pulled the boy up, his small body shaking with exhaustion and fear. The child clung to him with desperate strength, sobbing into his shoulder. "It's okay," Marcus whispered, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "You're safe now. I'm going to get all of you out." He carried the boy to higher ground, then returned to the graves. The sound of crying came from all 7 sites now, as if his rescue of the first child had given the others renewed hope. "Marcus." moved to the next depression, and began digging again, his bleeding hands working frantically to uncover another makeshift coffin. This one contained a girl, younger than the first child, with blonde braids and a face streaked with tears. She was too weak to climb out on her own, so Marcus lifted her carefully, checking for injuries as he carried her to where the boy waited. She whispered, "Thank you," in a voice barely audible, then curled up in the grass and closed her eyes. Third box held twin boys, maybe 6 years old, identical except for a small scar on one's chin. They had been buried together, their small bodies pressed against each other for comfort in the darkness. When Marcus freed them, they refused to let go of each other's hands, speaking in hushed whispers as if afraid their voices might disappear. Again, the fourth grave contained another girl, older than the rest, perhaps 12, with red hair and freckles across her nose. She was conscious but barely responsive, her lips blue from lack of oxygen. Marcus checked her pulse, felt the rapid flutter of her heartbeat, and knew she needed medical attention soon. The fifth and sixth boxes each held young children, another boy and girl, both around 7 or 8 years old, both traumatized but alive. As Marcus pulled them from their underground prisons, they clung to each other and to him with the desperate gratitude of those who had stared death in the face and then pulled back. The seventh grave was the hardest to uncover. The earth had been packed down more tightly, and the wooden box was deeper than the others. When Marcus finally broke through the lid, he found the smallest child of all, a girl who couldn't have been more than 5, with dark curls and enormous brown eyes that held too much wisdom for someone so young. She didn't cry when she saw him. She just reached up with tiny arms and whispered, "I knew someone would come. I told the others that someone would come and find us." 7 children, ranging in age from 5 to 12, all of them buried alive in crude wooden boxes in his field. All of them somehow still breathing, still clinging to life despite what had to have been hours underground. As Marcus gathered them together in the morning sunlight, he tried to process what had happened, who could have done such a thing, and why his property had been chosen as the site for this unthinkable crime. The children huddled together, like survivors of a shipwreck, comforting each other with the instinctive solidarity of shared trauma. The oldest girl, the redhead, seemed to be their unofficial leader. Despite her own ordeal, she moved among the others, checking on the younger ones, whispering reassurances. "What are your names?" Marcus asked gently, kneeling beside them in the grass. The redhead looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. "I'm Rebecca," she said. "These are my brothers and sisters. Well, not all blood relations, but we're family. The man who took us said we were unwanted children, that nobody would miss us." Marcus felt a cold rage building in his chest. "What man? Who did this to you?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rebecca's face went pale, and several of the younger children began to whimper. "He called himself Pastor Jeremiah," she said quietly. "He ran a home for children nobody wanted. He said he was going to help us find peace, that we were better off with God than in this cruel world." The pieces began to fall into place. A predator using religious authority to prey on vulnerable children, probably runaways or kids from the foster system, children whose disappearances might not be immediately noticed. Marcus's isolated ranch would have made the perfect dumping ground, far from prying eyes and casual discovery. "How long were you down there?" he asked. "Since yesterday morning," Rebecca replied. "He brought us here in a van, made us get in the boxes, said it would only hurt for a little while, then we'd be in heaven with the angels. 18 hours. These children had been buried alive for 18 hours, surviving on whatever air could filter through the small holes drilled in their coffins. The fact that they were all still conscious, still responsive, bordered on miraculous. Marcus looked around at his empty ranch, at the mountains rising in the distance, at the morning sun that had witnessed both his despair and this impossible rescue. Less than an hour ago, he had been ready to end his life, convinced that he had nothing left to offer the world. Now 7 children sat in his pasture, alive because he had been in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment to hear their cries. The revolver still lay forgotten beneath the oak tree, but Marcus barely remembered why he had brought it there. Purpose had replaced despair so completely that his earlier intentions felt like they belonged to someone else's life. These children needed help, needed protection, needed someone to stand between them and whoever had tried to bury them alive. "We need to get you all to a hospital," he said, standing and looking toward the ranch house. "And then we need to call the police." Rebecca grabbed his sleeve with a desperate grip. "Please don't take us back to the system," she pleaded. "Pastor Jeremiah, he took us from different places, group homes, foster families, the streets. Nobody's looking for us. Nobody cares if we disappear. If you turn us over to the authorities, we'll just end up in another place where someone can hurt us." Marcus looked down at her frightened face, at the 6 other children depending on her strength and wisdom. He thought about Sarah, about what she would have done in this situation. She had always wanted children, had mourned every lost pregnancy as a life unlived. These 7 had been given back their lives by pure chance, by his desperate walk to end his own suffering. "Nobody's going to hurt you," he said with a conviction that surprised him. "Not while I'm breathing." The words hung in the morning air, like a vow, witnessed by the mountains and the circling hawk in the oak tree that had watched over love and loss, and now, perhaps, redemption. Marcus Wright had come to his field to die, but instead he had found 7 reasons to live. Marcus guided the 7 children toward his ranch house, a 2-story structure that Sarah had painted yellow because she said it looked like sunshine even on cloudy days. The paint was peeling now, and several shutters hung askew, but it was still solid, still standing. As they walked across the uneven ground, the smallest girl, the 5-year-old with dark curls, stumbled and fell to her knees. Without hesitation, Marcus scooped her up in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her tiny frame far too light for a child her age. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "Lily," she whispered, her small hand clutching the fabric of his flannel shirt. "Are you going to keep us safe?" The question hit him like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had asked him to keep them safe? When was the last time anyone had needed him for anything beyond paying bills or signing foreclosure papers? "Yes," he said, and meant it completely. "I'm going to keep you safe." The ranch house kitchen hadn't seen this much activity in over a year. Marcus settled the children around the large wooden table that had once hosted holiday dinners and birthday celebrations. Sarah had insisted on a table big enough for the family they'd hoped to have. And now, unexpectedly, it was finally serving its intended purpose. Rebecca, the red-haired 12-year-old who seemed to carry the weight of protecting the others, surveyed the room with cautious eyes. "How do we know you're different?" she asked bluntly. "How do we know you won't hurt us like the others did?" Marcus paused in his search through the refrigerator, understanding the question beneath her words. These children had learned to distrust adult kindness, to expect cruelty disguised as care. "You don't," he said honestly, pulling out milk and eggs. "But hungry people need food, and scared people need shelter. Everything else we'll figure out as we go." He began preparing breakfast, his hands working automatically through routines Sarah had taught him. Scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice from the carton he'd bought, but never opened. The familiar motions calmed him, gave him something concrete to focus on while his mind processed the impossible situation unfolding in his kitchen. The twin boys sat side by side, still holding hands, their dark eyes tracking Marcus's every movement. One had a small scar on his chin. Marcus decided to call him Scar internally until he learned their names. The other twin leaned heavily against his brother, exhaustion etched in every line of his small body. "I'm James," Scar said suddenly, as if reading Marcus's thoughts. "This is my brother Daniel. We've been together since we were babies. They tried to separate us once, but we ran away." "How old are you boys?" Marcus asked, flipping eggs in the cast-iron skillet that had belonged to Sarah's grandmother. "7," Daniel whispered, his voice hoarse from hours of screaming underground. "We'll be 8 next month, if we live that long." The casual acceptance of potential death in such a young voice made Marcus's chest tighten. What kind of life had these children lived that an 8-year-old spoke about survival as a daily uncertainty? The boy Marcus had rescued, first thin, dark-haired, with intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog everything, introduced himself as Michael. "I was in the system for 3 years," he said matter-of-factly. 5 different homes. The last family said I was too smart for my own good, that I asked too many questions. The blonde girl, who hadn't spoken since her rescue, finally offered her name in a voice barely above a whisper. "Emma, I'm 9. I haven't talked to grown-ups in a long time because they usually don't listen anyway." The remaining 2 children were siblings, 10-year-old Carlos and 8-year-old Sophia. Carlos had protective instincts that reminded Marcus of Rebecca, constantly checking on his younger sister, making sure she got the first sip of juice, the warmest spot at the table. Sophia clung to her brother with the desperate attachment of someone who had learned that family was the only constant in an unstable world. As they ate, Marcus studied their faces, noting the hollow cheeks that spoke of irregular meals, the dark circles under their eyes that suggested poor sleep, the way they all ate with urgent efficiency, as if the food might disappear at any moment. These were children who had learned to expect deprivation, to grab what they could when it was available. "Tell me about this Pastor Jeremiah," Marcus said carefully, not wanting to traumatize them further, but needing information. Rebecca set down her fork, her young face hardening with memory. "He ran a place called Haven House about 2 hours east of here. Said it was a refuge for unwanted children, a place where we could find peace and purpose. The social workers thought it was legitimate. He had all the right papers, said all the right things. But it wasn't legitimate," Michael added, his voice carrying anger too mature for his years. "He kept us isolated, wouldn't let us contact the outside world, said we were being purified, prepared for something greater. He talked about cleansing a lot," Carlos said quietly, his arm around Sophia. "Said some children were too damaged by the world to be saved, that the kindest thing was to help them find eternal peace." Marcus felt sick. A religious fanatic using scripture to justify murdering children, specifically targeting those the system had failed, those whose disappearances might not trigger immediate investigations. How many others were there, at this Haven House? "Maybe 20 kids when we left," Rebecca said. "But children came and went. Pastor Jeremiah said they were being placed with good families, but..." She trailed off, unwilling to voice what they all suspected. "We 7 were the newest arrivals," James said. "He said we needed special preparation, that we were going to help him demonstrate God's mercy to the world." The plan became horrifyingly clear to Marcus. Jeremiah had intended to bury these children alive as some twisted religious statement, probably planning to unearth their bodies later as proof of divine judgment or martyrdom. The isolated location of Marcus's ranch made it perfect for such a scheme, far from witnesses, with fresh graves that could be explained away as animal burial sites if discovered. "Does anyone know you're missing?" Marcus asked. "Social workers, foster families, anyone who might come looking?" The children exchanged glances, and Marcus saw the terrible truth in their eyes. They were society's forgotten ones, children who had slipped through cracks in the system, whose absence would be noted eventually, but not immediately. Jeremiah had chosen his victims carefully. "My caseworker hasn't checked on me in 6 months," Emma said. "She has too many kids to keep track of." "Our last foster dad said good riddance when we ran away," Daniel added. "Said he was tired of dealing with problem children." Rebecca's voice was bitter beyond her years. That's why Jeremiah targeted us. We're the ones nobody wants, the ones nobody misses, perfect victims. Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the pasture where he'd found them. The empty graves were still visible, dark scars on the landscape that would haunt his dreams. That ends now, he said. Firmly, you're not unwanted. You're not forgotten. You're here, and you're alive, and that matters. But even as he spoke the words, Marcus knew the complexity of the situation. 7 traumatized children with questionable legal status, a religious fanatic still at large, and a system that had already failed these kids once. He couldn't simply call Child Protective Services and hope for the best that would likely send them back into the same broken system that had made them vulnerable in the first place. What happens now? Lily asked, her small voice cutting through his thoughts. She had finished her eggs and was now sitting cross-legged in her chair, looking impossibly tiny in the large kitchen. Marcus returned to the table, pulling out a chair and sitting down to be at eye level with the children. First, we make sure you're all healthy. Then we figure out how to keep you safe while we deal with this Pastor Jeremiah. You can't go to the police, Rebecca said urgently. Not yet. Jeremiah has connections, he told us so. Said he had friends in law enforcement, in social services. If word gets out that we're alive, he'll find a way to get to us. The paranoia in her voice might have seemed excessive in any other context, but Marcus had to consider the possibility that she was right. A man running an illegal operation for years would need corrupt contacts to avoid detection. Local law enforcement in a small Colorado town might not be equipped to handle such a complex situation. Okay, Marcus said slowly. We'll be careful about who we trust, but we can't hide forever. This man needs to be stopped before he hurts other children. There's something else, Michael said hesitantly. Pastor Jeremiah, he didn't work alone. There was a woman, Sister Catherine, he called. She helped with the daily operations, kept track of the children's records. And there were others, people who came and went, who brought new kids or took the special ones away. A network. This wasn't just one disturbed individual, but an organized operation. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. These children had escaped one nightmare only to find themselves dependent on a stranger who had no idea how to protect them from such sophisticated predators. The morning sun had climbed higher, warming the kitchen and highlighting the exhaustion etched in every young face around the table. Carlos and Sofia were fighting to keep their eyes open, leaning against each other for support. Lily had curled up in her chair like a cat, thumb in her mouth despite being too old for such comfort. You all need rest, Marcus said gently. Real sleep in real beds, not. He couldn't finish the sentence. Not in wooden boxes underground. We don't want to be separated, Rebecca said quickly. We stay together. That's how we survived, by taking care of each other. Marcus nodded, understanding the bond trauma had forged between them. The guest rooms upstairs are big enough for several people. We'll figure out sleeping arrangements that keep everyone together. He led them upstairs, past family photos that chronicled his life with Sarah, their wedding day, anniversaries, vacations to places that seemed impossibly distant now. The children studied the pictures with curiosity, seeing glimpses of the happiness this house had once contained. The master bedroom remained exactly as Sarah had left it, her clothes still in the closet, her books on the nightstand. Marcus couldn't bear to disturb it, so he guided the children past that closed door to the guest rooms that had been prepared for visitors who rarely came. The largest room had 2 double beds and a daybed by the window. Sarah had decorated it in soft blues and greens, with quilts her mother had made and curtains that filtered the mountain light into gentle patterns on the walls. The children entered hesitantly, as if afraid to believe such comfort was really meant for them. The bathroom is down the hall, Marcus said. Clean towels in the closet, soap and shampoo in the shower. Take your time, use whatever you need. Rebecca looked at him suspiciously. What about you? Where will you be? Downstairs. Probably. I have some thinking to do, some phone calls to make. The door doesn't lock from the outside. You can come and go as you please. It was a small thing, but he saw the tension leave Rebecca's shoulders at the mention of unlocked doors. These children have learned to fear confinement, to value escape. Roots above comfort. One by one, they claimed spaces in the room. The twins took one bed, Carlos and Sofia another, while Rebecca, Emma, and Michael arranged themselves on the daybed and floor cushions. Lily, the youngest, looked uncertainly between the groups until Rebecca patted the space beside her. You'll be safe here, Rebecca told her, and Marcus realized she was speaking as much to herself as to the little girl. Marcus left them to rest and returned downstairs, his mind racing with the complexity of what he'd undertaken. 7 children, all with legal complications and psychological trauma, all dependent on him for protection from a dangerous organization. The man who had planned to end his life that morning was now responsible for preserving 7 others. Sat at Sarah's old desk in the study, staring at the phone. Who could he trust? Who would believe the story and have the resources to help? The local sheriff was a decent man, but possibly compromised or simply outmatched. The state police might be better, but bureaucracy moved slowly when children's lives were at stake. The sound of running water came from upstairs, someone taking advantage of the shower. Marcus imagined the relief of washing away the dirt and fear of their underground ordeal, the simple pleasure of hot water and clean towels. When was the last time these children had experienced such basic comforts without fear or time limits? A soft knock at the study door interrupted his thoughts. Michael stood in the doorway, hair damp from washing, wearing clothes that hung loosely on his thin frame. I wanted to thank you, the boy said formally, for digging us up, for feeding us, for not calling the authorities right away. Marcus gestured to the chair across from the desk. You don't need to thank me, son. Anyone would have done the same. Michael sat down, his intelligent eyes studying Marcus with uncomfortable intensity. No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have called 911 immediately, let the system handle it. You listened to Rebecca when she said we might not be safe going back. The boy's maturity was unsettling, the product of experiences no child should have. You're a smart kid, Michael. What do you think we should do? Document everything, Michael said without hesitation. Rebecca's memory is best. She pays attention to details the rest of us miss. Write down everything we remember about Haven House, about Pastor Jeremiah and Sister Catherine, about the other children who disappeared. Build a case so strong that when we do contact authorities, they can't ignore it or cover it up. Marcus leaned back in his chair, impressed despite the circumstances. That's good thinking. What else? Find allies. People who care more about children than politics or covering their mistakes. Journalists, maybe, or advocacy groups. Make the story too public to suppress. And in the meantime? Michael's expression grew serious. We stay hidden. Jeremiah thinks we're dead. That's our biggest advantage. He won't be looking for us, won't be covering his tracks. But that advantage won't last long. Eventually, someone will check on Haven House, or he'll try this again with other children. The conversation was interrupted by footsteps on the stairs. Rebecca appeared, leading the other children, all of them cleaned up and looking slightly more like the kids they should have been. But their eyes still held that wariness, that readiness to run or fight that spoke of lives lived on the edge of danger. We've been talking, Rebecca said, taking charge as naturally as breathing. We want to help stop him, all of us. We're the only witnesses to what really happens at Haven House, the only proof that children are disappearing. Marcus felt a surge of admiration for their courage, mixed with protective instinct that surprised him with its intensity. These children had survived horrors that would break many adults, and their first thought was preventing other children from suffering the same fate. It's dangerous, he warned. If Jeremiah discovers you're alive... Then we make sure he doesn't, Carlos said firmly, his arm around Sofia. We're already dead as far as he knows. We can use that. The afternoon stretched ahead of them, full of impossible decisions and dangerous possibilities. But for the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus felt a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. These 7 children had given him a reason to fight, a cause worth the risk. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over the mountains, promising rain and wind and the kind of weather that drove people indoors and made them grateful for shelter. Marcus looked at the children arranged around his study, some sitting, some standing, all of them watching him with a mixture of hope and determination, and realized that sometimes salvation came in the most unexpected forms. The house felt alive again, filled with voices and purpose, and the kind of desperate hope that only survived in those who had everything to lose and everything to gain. 7 children had been buried alive in his field, and their resurrection had somehow brought his own. 3 days had passed since Marcus pulled 7 children from their underground graves, and the ranch house had transformed into something he'd never experienced, a home filled with young voices, the patter of small feet on wooden floors, and the constant hum of life in motion. The silence that had suffocated him for 14 months had been replaced by a symphony of childhood sounds, whispered conversations, muffled giggles, the rustle of sheets as restless sleepers searched for comfort. Marcus stood in the kitchen at dawn, preparing breakfast for 8 instead of 1. The routine had become surprisingly natural: scrambled eggs for the group, toast cut into triangles because Lily preferred them that way, orange juice in plastic cups because glass made Sofia nervous. These small accommodations felt like privileges rather than burdens, each one a reminder that his life now had purpose beyond his own survival. Rebecca emerged from upstairs first, as she did every morning, her red hair braided back and her clothes donated. Items from Sarah's old charity box hanging loose on her slight frame. She moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, checking the milk temperature, counting out vitamins Marcus had found in the medicine cabinet, ensuring everything was ready for the younger children. "You don't have to do that," Marcus said gently, watching her motherly preparations. "You're 12 years old. You should be worried about homework and friends, not taking care of everyone else." Rebecca paused in her careful arrangement of napkins. "Someone has to," she said simply. "I've been doing it for 3 years. I don't know how to stop." The weight in her voice told the story of a childhood sacrificed to necessity, of a young girl forced to become a caretaker when the adults in her life failed. Marcus had seen the same responsibility in Sarah's eyes when she'd cared for her dying father, the way duty and love intertwined until they became indistinguishable. "Maybe you don't have to stop," Marcus said carefully. "Maybe you just need help." The other children began filtering downstairs, each carrying their own morning rituals and anxieties. Michael appeared with a notebook. He'd been documenting everything about Haven House, creating detailed maps and timelines with the methodical precision of someone far older than his 10 years. The twins, James and Daniel, stayed close together as always, sharing whispered conversations in a language only they understood. Carlos guided Sofia to her usual spot at the table, checking the chair for splinters before letting her sit, a habit born from experience with unstable furniture in temporary homes. Emma sat quietly with her hands folded, still adjusting to the concept that she was allowed to speak during meals. And Lily, the youngest, had claimed the chair closest to Marcus, as if his proximity could ward off the nightmares that still visited her sleep. "I've been thinking about our next move," Michael announced as they ate, opening his notebook to pages covered in careful handwriting. "We need more than just our testimony. We need evidence, documents, financial records, proof of the network." Jeremiah was running. Marcus nodded, impressed by the boy's strategic thinking. "What do you have in mind?" "Haven House," Rebecca said, understanding immediately. It's been 4 days since Jeremiah buried us. He probably thinks his plan worked, that we're dead and buried. He might have gone back to business as usual. Or he might have panicked and destroyed evidence, Carlos pointed out, ever the cautious one. Only one way to find out, Michael said. Grimly, someone needs to go there and see what's left. The idea hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus felt his protective instincts surge. The thought of any of these children returning to that place made his stomach clench with anxiety. But he also recognized the logic. They needed proof, and the children were the only ones who knew. The location and layout of Haven House. Absolutely not, he said firmly. None of you are going anywhere near that place. But we're the only ones who know where everything is, Rebecca argued. Jeremiah's office, the files he kept on all the children, the basement where he held private meetings with Sister Catherine. I'll go alone, Marcus said. You can give me directions, draw maps, tell me what to look for. You don't understand, Emma said suddenly, her quiet voice commanding attention. It's not just about knowing where things are. Haven House looks normal from the outside, like a regular group home. If Jeremiah's still there, if there are still children. She didn't finish the sentence, but Marcus understood. A strange adult showing up asking questions would trigger alarms, possibly putting other children at risk. But children returning, even children who were supposed to be dead, might be able to move undetected long enough to gather evidence. There's another problem, Lily said, her small voice barely audible. Sister Catherine knows our faces. If she sees us ... she know we escaped, James finished. She know Pastor Jeremiah failed. The implications were chilling. If Jeremiah's operation discovered that the children had survived, they would face 2 immediate threats: elimination of witnesses and accelerated disposal of evidence. Any investigation would need to move quickly and carefully. What about the other children? Sophia asked, speaking for the first time that morning. The ones still at Haven House. If Jeremiah realizes we're alive, what will he do to them? The question silenced the table. Marcus saw the guilt and anguish in each young face survivor's remorse mixed with desperate concern for those they'd left behind. These children had escaped hell, but others remained trapped, and their rescue attempt could either save or doom those still under Jeremiah's control. We need help, Marcus said finally. Professional help. People with experience dealing with situations like this. FBI, Michael said immediately. Child trafficking, interstate crimes, religious fraud, it's all federal jurisdiction. Rebecca shook her head. Jeremiah always said he had friends in high places. What if some of those friends are federal agents? The paranoia that had kept these children alive was now complicating their rescue efforts. Trust, once broken, was difficult to rebuild, especially when survival had depended on assuming the worst about adult authority figures. Marcus excused himself from the table and walked to the study, needing space to think. The morning light streaming through Sarah's lace curtains illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, a reminder of how quiet and still this house had been just days ago. Now it vibrated with energy and purpose, but also with danger he wasn't equipped to handle alone. The phone sat on the desk like an accusation. One call could bring professional help, but it could also expose the children to the very system that had failed them before. Another call could alert the wrong people, setting in motion events that would put everyone at risk. Footsteps in the hallway announced Michael's approach. The boy knocked softly before entering, his notebook clutched against his chest like armor. I've been thinking about what you said, Michael began. About needing professional help. There might be someone we can trust. Marcus gestured to the chair across from the desk. Tell me. Before Haven House, I was in a group home in Denver. There was a social worker there, Ms. Rodriguez. She was different from the others. She actually listened, actually cared. When I told her about problems with one of the foster families, She investigated instead of just moving me somewhere else. What makes you think she'd help now? Michael's expression grew serious beyond his years. Because she was the one who warned me about places like Haven House. She said there were people who used the system to find vulnerable children, who preyed on kids nobody was watching closely. She told me to be careful, to trust my instincts. A social worker who understood the system's vulnerabilities might be exactly what they needed, someone with professional credentials and investigative authority, but also personal investment in protecting children rather than protecting institutions. Do you remember her full name? How to contact her? Maria Rodriguez, Denver County Social Services. She gave me her direct number and said to call if I ever felt unsafe. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. Worn soft from handling, I've kept it all this time. Marcus studied the carefully preserved phone number. Recognizing it as a lifeline Michael had carried through multiple placements and eventual abduction. The fact that he'd kept it suggested a level of trust rare in his young life. We'll need to be careful about how we approach her, Marcus said. If word gets out that you're alive before we're ready... I know, but Ms. Rodriguez, she's smart. She understands the situation. Before Marcus could respond, the sound of a vehicle approaching the house made them both freeze. The remote location of the ranch meant visitors were rare and usually announced. Marcus moved to the window, peering through the curtains at a black sedan climbing the long gravel driveway. Get the others, Marcus said quietly. Upstairs, out of sight, now. Michael vanished from the study with the silent efficiency he'd learned during months of hiding. Marcus heard soft footsteps on the stairs, whispered warnings, the careful closing of doors. Within moments, the house returned to the deceptive quiet of an empty home. The sedan pulled up near the front porch, and two figures emerged, a man in a dark suit and a woman carrying a briefcase. They moved with the confident authority of people accustomed to having doors opened for them. Questions answered, cooperation provided without question. Marcus opened the front door before they could knock, stepping onto the porch and closing the door firmly behind him. The message was clear. They were not invited inside, Mr. Wright. The man was middle-aged, with silver hair and cold eyes that cataloged everything they saw. I'm Agent Harrison, FBI. This is Agent Chun. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your property. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but kept his expression neutral. What kind of questions? Agent Chun, a sharp-faced woman with calculating eyes, consulted her briefcase. We've received reports of suspicious activity in this area. Possible grave sites, disturbed earth. We understand you've been having some financial difficulties. Sometimes people allow their land to be used for activities they might not normally condone. The implication was clear. They suspected him of allowing criminals to bury bodies on his property in exchange for payment. It was a logical assumption, but dangerously close to the truth in ways they couldn't imagine. I haven't noticed any suspicious activity, Marcus said carefully. But you're welcome to look around. Agent Harrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We appreciate your cooperation. Mind if we start with the area near that large oak tree? Our satellite imagery shows some ground disturbance there. Marcus's blood turned to ice. The graves where he'd found the children were clearly visible from above, fresh scars on the landscape that would be impossible to explain away. But agreeing to show them the site would raise questions he couldn't answer without exposing the children. Of course, he said, buying time. Let me get my boots. He stepped back inside, closing the door and leaning against it for a moment. The children were hidden upstairs, but federal agents would want to search the house eventually. He had minutes to decide how much truth to reveal, how much risk to accept. Michael appeared at the top of the stairs, his notebook still clutched in his hands. I heard voices, he whispered. FBI agents. They know about the graves. Michael's face went pale. Jeremiah. He must have reported us missing, made it look like he was cooperating with an investigation. The pieces clicked into place. Jeremiah had covered his tracks by claiming the children were missing, possibly abducted, and suggesting that Marcus's property might be involved. It was a brilliant manipulation, using law enforcement to eliminate witnesses while maintaining his own cover. What do we do? Michael asked. Marcus looked up the stairs at the boy who'd trusted him with a social worker's phone number, who'd documented evidence with the hope of justice, who'd survived burial alive only to face exposure by the very authorities, who should have protected him. We take a chance, Marcus said. On Ms. Rodriguez, on the truth, on the possibility that some people in the system actually want to help children instead of covering up crimes. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed the number from Michael's worn piece of paper. While federal agents waited outside to examine the evidence of his impossible rescue, Marcus Wright prepared to bet 7 young lives on the hope that somewhere in the broken system, someone still cared enough to listen. The phone rang once, twice. Outside, Agent Harrison was growing impatient, his footsteps echoing on the porch boards. Upstairs, 6 children waited in silence, their futures hanging on a conversation that hadn't yet begun. On the 3rd ring, a warm voice answered, "Maria Rodriguez, how can I help you?" Marcus took a deep breath and spoke the words that would either save them all or destroy everything they'd built in 3 precious days of safety. "Ms. Rodriguez, my name is Marcus Wright, and I have 7 children here who need your help. One of them is Michael Chun. He says you know him. They've just escaped from a place called Haven House, and there are federal agents at my door right now who might not be who they claim to be." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for an eternity. Outside, Agent Harrison knocked impatiently on the door. Upstairs, 7 young lives hung in the balance, waiting to discover whether trust was a luxury they could afford or a necessity they couldn't survive without. The silence on the phone stretched, like a held breath before Maria Rodriguez's voice cut through the tension with sharp professionalism. "Michael Chun? Thin boy, dark hair, too smart for his own good and brave enough to get himself in trouble?" "That's him," Marcus said, relief flooding through him at the recognition in her voice. "Mr. Wright, I need you to listen very carefully. Do not let those agents into your house. Do not answer any more questions. Tell them you need to consult with an attorney before proceeding. Can you do that?" "Yes, but no buts. I know about Haven House. I've been investigating Pastor Jeremiah for 8 months, but he's been very careful to stay ahead of official channels. If Michael and the others escaped from there, they're in immediate danger. Those agents may not be who they claim to be." Marcus felt his world tilt. "You've been investigating? Why didn't you?" "Because every time I got close, evidence disappeared, witnesses vanished, and suddenly I was reassigned to other cases. Someone with significant influence has been protecting that operation." Maria's voice carried the frustration of months of blocked investigations. "How many children are with you?" "7 total. They were buried alive." "Jesus," Maria breathed. "Listen, I'm 3 hours away, but I can have state police there in 40 minutes. Real state police, not whoever's standing on your porch. Do you have somewhere secure to keep the children until help arrives?" Marcus glanced toward the stairs where 7 young lives waited in hiding, the root cellar beneath the kitchen. "It's hidden behind a false wall. Perfect. Get them there now quietly. Then go back outside and stall those agents however you can. I'm making calls while I drive." The line went dead, leaving Marcus with a dial tone and a pounding heart. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, finding the children clustered in the hallway, their faces pale with anxiety. "Change of plans," he whispered urgently. "Those aren't real FBI agents. We're going to the root cellar until help arrives." Rebecca's eyes widened. "How do you know they're not real?" "Because Maria Rodriguez has been investigating Haven House for months. She knows about Pastor Jeremiah. The children moved with silent efficiency, born from months of hiding and running. Michael gathered his notebook and evidence, while Rebecca ensured the younger ones understood the gravity of their situation. Within minutes, they had assembled in the kitchen, waiting for Marcus's signal. The root cellar entrance was concealed behind a panel that looked like part of the kitchen cabinetry. Sarah had insisted on the hiding place during the Cold War paranoia of the 1960s, never imagining it would one day shelter children fleeing a different kind of evil. Marcus pressed the hidden latch, and the panel swung open to reveal wooden steps descending into darkness. "It's not deep, maybe 8 feet down," he explained quietly. "There's battery-powered lighting and emergency supplies. Stay quiet, stay together, and don't come out unless you hear my voice saying your names." One by one, the children disappeared into the hidden space. Lily hesitated at the top of the stairs, her small hand reaching for Marcus's shirt. "What if those bad men find us?" she whispered. Marcus knelt to her level, meeting her frightened eyes. "Then I'll deal with them. But that's not going to happen. You're safe here. Promise?" The word hit him with unexpected force. When was the last time someone had asked him to promise their safety? When was the last time his word had mattered that much to another human being? "I promise," he said, and meant it completely. After securing the cellar entrance, Marcus returned to the front porch where the supposed agents waited with thinly veiled impatience. Agent Harrison had moved closer to the door, his hand resting casually near his jacket, a position that suggested weapons training and readiness to use force. "Sorry for the delay," Marcus said, pulling on work boots with deliberate slowness. "Had to check on my livestock. Ranch work never stops." "Of course," Agent Chun replied, though her smile seemed forced. "Shall we examine those disturbed areas now?" Marcus led them across the pasture toward the oak tree, his mind racing through possible scenarios. The empty graves were clearly visible. In the morning light, 7 rectangular depressions in the earth that told an obvious story. How could he explain them without revealing the children's survival? "Here's what caught our attention," Agent Harrison said, gesturing toward the burial sites. "Fresh excavation, multiple grave-shaped holes. Care to explain what happened here?" Marcus studied the evidence of his desperate digging, the scattered dirt and broken wooden boards still visible around each site. "Found them like this yesterday morning. Figured animals might have been digging around, maybe coyotes after something buried." "Animals," Agent Chun repeated skeptically. "Animals that dig perfectly rectangular holes and remove wooden boxes?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus realized his story wouldn't hold up under any scrutiny, but he only needed to buy time until Maria's promised help arrived. "Look, I don't know what to tell you," he said, adopting the defensive tone of someone with nothing to hide. "I found the holes, figured maybe someone was using my land for something illegal. Was planning to call the sheriff this morning." Agent Harrison's expression hardened. "Mr. Wright, we have reason to believe these graves contain the bodies of 7 missing children from a group home called Haven House. Those children disappeared 4 days ago, and we're tracking their abductor." The fabricated story was clever, positioning Jeremiah as the victim rather than the perpetrator, suggesting that someone else had killed the children and buried them on Marcus's property. It would explain the empty graves as evidence tampering, and make Marcus a suspect in their disappearance. "Missing children?" Marcus tried to sound shocked. "On my land? That's horrible. Who would do such a thing?" "That's what we're trying to determine," Agent Chun said, circling one of the empty graves. "These boxes were clearly designed to hold human remains. The question is, who removed the bodies and why?" "Maybe whoever buried them came back for them," Marcus suggested. "Realized this was too exposed, moved them somewhere more secure." Agent Harrison exchanged a look with his partner, a communication that spoke of shared knowledge and coordinated deception. "Mr. Wright, we're going to need to search your property thoroughly. House, outbuildings, any place someone might hide evidence. The moment Marcus had been dreading. A search of the house would inevitably discover the hidden cellar, especially if these weren't real federal agents, but rather Jeremir's associates with detailed knowledge of what they were looking for. I'll need to see some identification first, Marcus said, playing for time. Badges, credentials, whatever you carry. Both agents produced what appeared to be authentic FBI identification, complete with photographs and official seals. But Maria's warning, echoed in his mind, corrupt law enforcement, could mean authentic credentials in the wrong hands. I'd like to call my attorney before we proceed, Marcus said, just to make sure my rights are protected. Agent Harrison's mask slipped slightly, revealing irritation beneath the professional facade. Mr. Wright, we're investigating the murder of 7 children. Every minute we delay gives the killer more time to destroy evidence or flee. Are you really going to obstruct a federal investigation over legal technicalities? The emotional manipulation was expertly applied. What reasonable person would delay justice for murdered children? But Marcus had learned to distrust expert manipulation, having watched it destroy 7 young lives. I understand the urgency, he said carefully. But I also understand that innocent people sometimes get caught up in investigations. I'll cooperate. Fully once I've spoken with counsel. Fine, Agent Chun snapped, her patience finally exhausted. But understand that your refusal to cooperate will be noted in our report. Judges tend to wonder why innocent people need lawyers. A distant sound made all 3 of them look toward the access road, the rumble of multiple vehicles approaching at high speed. Within moments, 2 Colorado State Police cruisers appeared on the horizon, their emergency lights flashing against the morning sky. Agent Harrison's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. Were you expecting company, Mr. Wright? No, Marcus said honestly, though relief flooded through him. But I'm not complaining. The state police vehicles pulled up near the house, disgorging 4 officers in full tactical gear. Their leader, a tall woman with sergeant's stripes, approached with her hand resting on her sidearm. Mr. Wright, I'm Sergeant Lopez, Colorado State Police. We received a call about federal agents on your property conducting an unauthorized investigation. Agent Harrison stepped forward, his credentials already in hand. Sergeant, I'm Agent Harrison. FBI. We're investigating a multiple homicide involving missing children. I'm not sure who called you, but there's been some misunderstanding. Sergeant Lopez examined the offered identification with professional skepticism. Sir, I'm going to need you and your partner to step away from Mr. Wright while I verify your credentials. This is highly irregular, Agent Chun protested. We're conducting a federal investigation. Then you won't mind waiting while I confirm. That with FBI headquarters, Lopez replied smoothly. Standard procedure when we receive reports of suspicious activity. The standoff stretched taut as Lopez spoke into her radio, requesting verification of the agent's identities and authority. Agent Harrison's body language shifted subtly, tension replacing confidence as he realized his operation was unraveling. Marcus caught Sergeant Lopez's eye and nodded slightly toward the house. She understood immediately, positioning herself between the supposed agents and the building. While her officers spread out to control the scene, the radio crackled with Lopez's supervisor's voice, negative on those credentials. Sergeant, FBI has no active investigation in your area, and no agents by those names are currently deployed in Colorado. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Agent Harrison's hand moved toward his weapon, but found itself facing 4 state police officers with superior positioning and firepower. The careful facade crumbled as he realized the game was over. Hands where we can see them, Lopez commanded, her weapon drawn. Both of you slowly. Agent Chun, or whoever she really was, raised her hands with the resigned air of someone whose cover had been blown. This is a mistake. You're interfering with a sensitive operation. The only mistake was trying to impersonate federal agents, Lopez replied. Face down on the ground now. As the two imposters were cuffed and searched, Marcus felt his legs go weak with relief. The children were safe, the immediate threat was neutralized, and Maria Rodriguez had kept her word about sending help. Mr. Wright, Sergeant Lopez said, as her officers secured the prisoners, I understand there are some children here who need protection? Marcus nodded, his voice thick with emotion. 7 of them. Hidden in the root cellar. They've been through hell. Lopez spoke into her radio again, calling for Child Protective Services, medical personnel, and a crime scene team. Let's get them somewhere safe where they can tell their story. Marcus led the way to the kitchen, pressing the hidden latch that opened the cellar entrance. Rebecca? Michael? It's safe to come up now. The real police are here. 7 faces appeared in the opening, blinking in the sudden light. They climbed out slowly, staying close together, their eyes wide as they took in the scene of uniformed officers and controlled chaos. Rebecca stepped forward as their spokesperson, her red hair catching the morning light streaming through the windows. Are you really police? She asked Sergeant Lopez. Not more fake ones? Lopez knelt to Rebecca's level, her voice gentle despite her tactical gear. I'm really police. My name is Maria Lopez, and I've been waiting to meet you 7 for a long time. A social worker named Maria Rodriguez has been looking for you, and she's very worried about your safety. Ms. Rodriguez found us, Michael said, clutching his notebook. She's the one who sent you. That's right. And she's on her way here now with a whole team of people whose job is to keep children safe. Not like the fake agents, but real professionals who care about what happens to you. As if summoned by her words, another vehicle appeared on the access. Rhoda white SUV driving with urgent purpose. It pulled up near the state police cruisers, and Maria Rodriguez emerged, her professional composure barely containing her emotional investment in the moment. She was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering but hadn't lost their compassion. When she saw Michael among the group of children, her face lit up with genuine joy. Michael, she said, her voice thick with emotion. When you disappeared from the Morrison home, I knew something was wrong. I've been searching for months. Michael ran to her, his careful composure finally cracking as he hugged the one adult who had consistently shown him kindness. Ms. Rodriguez, there are others still at Haven House. Pastor Jeremiah has more children, and if he finds out we escaped, we're going to stop him, Maria said firmly, her arms around the boy who had trusted her number through months of horror. All of you are going to help us put him away forever. As the morning sun climbed higher over the Colorado mountains, the ranch that had been Marcus Wright's private grief became the epicenter of a rescue operation that would span multiple states and save dozens of children. 7 graves had yielded 7 lives, and those lives were about to become the key to dismantling an operation that had thrived in shadow and silence. But even as medical personnel examined the children and investigators documented evidence, Marcus knew their story was far from over. Pastor Jeremiah was still free, still dangerous, and still convinced that 7 witnesses to his crimes were safely buried beneath Colorado soil. The real battle was just beginning. The ranch house had been transformed into a command center within hours of Maria Rodriguez's arrival. The kitchen table where 7 children had shared their first safe meal now held laptops, evidence files, and tactical communication equipment. Colorado State Police, FBI agents, real ones this time, and child protection specialists moved through the house with purposeful efficiency, each focused on their piece of the puzzle that would bring down Pastor Jeremiah's operation. Marcus stood at the kitchen window, watching the controlled chaos while keeping one eye on the children who sat clustered on the living room couch. They had been examined by medical personnel, interviewed by specialists, and photographed for evidence, but through it all they had maintained their protective formation, 7 survivors who understood that their safety still depended on staying together. "Mr. Wright," a voice said behind him. Marcus turned to find Special Agent Sarah Kim, the FBI task force leader who had taken over the investigation. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she didn't often fail at objectives she set for herself. "Agent Kim," Marcus nodded. "Any word on the fake agents?" "Interesting story there," Kim said, consulting her tablet. "The man calling himself Harrison is actually David Brennan, a former police detective who was fired for evidence tampering 3 years ago. The woman, Agent Chun, is Christine Walsh. She's a private investigator with a history of working off-the-books cases for wealthy clients. So they're hired muscle, not true believers," Marcus observed. "Exactly, which means they might be willing to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. Pastor Jeremir's operation is more sophisticated than we initially thought. He's got money, connections, and a network of people willing to do illegal work for the right price." Through the living room doorway, Marcus could see Rebecca sitting with Michael, both of them poring over a tablet that showed satellite images of the Haven House compound. Even after everything they'd endured, the children were insisting on participating in the investigation, their desire for justice overriding their need for rest. "The children want to help with the raid," Marcus said. "They're convinced other kids are still in danger." Agent Kim followed his gaze. "They're right. We've confirmed at least 12 children currently at the facility, ages ranging from 6 to 15. But we can't use minors in an active law enforcement operation. What if they don't go in, but provide intelligence, layout, security procedures, daily routines information that could save lives during the raid?" Kim was quiet for a moment, weighing operational needs against child protection protocols. "It's irregular, but given the circumstances and the time-sensitive nature of the situation, we might be able to arrange something." She moved toward the living room, where the children looked up at her approach with expressions that mixed hope and wariness. Despite the morning's events, they still maintained the defensive postures of those who had learned not to trust adult authority too quickly. "I understand you want to help rescue the other children," Kim said, settling into a chair across from them. "Tell me what you think we need to know." Rebecca straightened, slipping naturally into her role as group spokesperson. "Haven House looks normal from the outside, like a regular group home with a playground and gardens. But there are cameras everywhere, motion sensors on all the doors, and Pastor Jeremir keeps the children under constant surveillance. The basement is where he holds private meetings," Michael added, his notebook open to detailed sketches. "He calls it spiritual counseling, but it's where he decides which children are ready for disposal." The clinical term sent a chill through the room. These children had lived with the constant awareness that their lives could be ended at any moment, that their value was measured by their compliance and silence. "How many staff members?" Agent Kim asked. "Usually 6 adults," Carlos said. "Sister Catherine runs the day-to-day operations. Brother Mark handles security and transportation. There are 4 others who rotate shifts, but they're not always there." "What about weapons?" The twins exchanged glances before James answered. "Brother Mark carries a gun. We've seen others locked in a cabinet in Pastor Jeremir's office. He always said they were for protection against people who didn't understand his mission." Agent Kim made notes on her tablet, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. The children answered with the systematic precision of intelligence assets, their trauma transformed into tactical advantage through necessity and determination. "There's something else," Emma said quietly, speaking for the first time since the interviews began. "Pastor Jeremir has visitors sometimes, important-looking people in expensive cars. He calls them benefactors, says they support his work with troubled children." "Benefactors," Kim repeated, her expression sharpening. "Can you describe any of them?" "One man comes every few weeks," Rebecca said. "Older, maybe 60, with silver hair and a fancy watch. Pastor Jeremir always gets nervous before his visits, Make sure everything looks perfect. And there's a woman, Sophia added. She comes less often, but when she does, Pastor Jeremiah shows her the children like we're merchandise. The implication hung in the air like a physical weight. This wasn't just a case of religious extremism or even simple child abuse. It was potentially a trafficking operation with wealthy clients and systematic exploitation. We need those names, Kim said grimly. And we need to move fast. If word gets out that you seven escaped, Jeremiah will either run or accelerate whatever timeline he's working on. Marcus watched the agent's face as she processed the intelligence, seeing the calculation behind her eyes. This was no longer a rescue operation for 12 children at a group home. It was a federal case involving organized crime, corruption, and victims in multiple states. How long before you can move? Marcus asked. 24 hours minimum, Kim replied. We need search warrants, coordination with local law enforcement, tactical planning. This isn't the kind of operation we can rush. 24 hours is too long, Rebecca said urgently. Pastor Jeremiah has routines, schedules. If he notices that the fake agents haven't reported back, he'll know something went wrong. Michael nodded agreement. He's paranoid about security breaches. Any deviation from normal procedures triggers lockdown protocols. What kind of lockdown? Kim asked. The children's faces went pale as they remembered protocols they'd hoped never to see again. Complete isolation, Rebecca said. No outside contact, no movement between buildings, no contact with the outside world. And if he thinks the operation is compromised. She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. If Pastor Jeremiah believed his network was exposed, he might decide to eliminate all evidence, including the children still under his control. There might be a way to buy time, Daniel said suddenly, surprising everyone by speaking up. Pastor Jeremiah is expecting a report from the fake agents. What if someone contacted him pretending to be them? Agent Kim looked intrigued. Explain. Tell him that children's bodies were successfully disposed of, that the investigation is closed. Make him think his plan worked perfectly, Daniel continued. It might keep him calm long enough for you to organize the raid. That's actually not a terrible idea, Kim admitted. We recovered cell phones from Brennan and Walsh. If we can figure out their communication protocols. I know how they reported to him, Lily said in her small voice, causing every adult in the room to stare at her in surprise. I heard them talking when they thought I was asleep. They were supposed to call a special number and use a code word. The 5-year-old's contribution to the tactical planning seemed surreal, but Marcus was beginning to understand that these children had survived by paying attention to details adults might miss. Their ability to gather intelligence wasn't academic, it was life or death. What was the code word? Kim asked gently. Harvest complete, Lily whispered. That's what they were supposed to say. The words sent another chill through the room. Even Pastor Jeremiah's operational language reflected his twisted view of the children as crops to be reaped, rather than human beings to be protected. We can work with that, Kim said, already reaching for her phone. But we'll need to make sure the timing is perfect. Too early and he might get suspicious. Too late and he might have already moved. Marcus excused himself from the tactical discussion and walked outside, needing space to process the magnitude of what was unfolding. When he'd pulled 7 children from shallow graves 3 days ago, he'd thought he was saving 7 lives. Now it appeared those 7 lives might be the key to dismantling an entire network of exploitation and murder. The afternoon sun painted the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and amber, the same colors that had witnessed his darkest moment just days earlier. The contrast felt surreal beauty unchanged, while everything else in his world had been transformed beyond recognition. Mr. Wright. Rebecca had followed him onto the porch, her expression showing the weight of responsibility she carried for the other children. Do you think this will work? The plan to fool Pastor Jeremiah? Marcus studied her face, seeing intelligence far beyond her 12 years, mixed with vulnerability that broke his heart. I think Agent Kim knows what she's doing. And I think you 7 are the bravest kids I've ever met. We're not brave, Rebecca said quietly. We're just stubborn. 2. Stubborn to die when someone wants us dead. Too stubborn to stay quiet when other children need help. Sometimes stubbornness and bravery are the same thing, Marcus replied. Especially when you're fighting for something bigger than yourself. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower toward the mountain peaks. In a few hours, federal agents would attempt to contact Pastor Jeremiah using stolen phones and intelligence gathered by traumatized children. If the deception worked, it would buy time for a rescue operation. If it failed, 12 children would pay the price for their gamble. Mr. Wright, Rebecca said eventually, what happens to us afterward? When this is all over and Pastor Jeremiah is arrested? The question Marcus had been dreading. These 7 children had no legal guardians, no stable homes to return to, no family members capable of providing care. The system that had failed them once would reclaim them, potentially scattering them across multiple states and institutions. I don't know, he said honestly. But I promise you this, whatever happens, you won't face it alone. We'll figure out a way to keep you together, to keep you safe. You can't promise that, Rebecca said with the cynicism of someone who had learned not to trust adult promises. No, Marcus agreed, but I can promise to try. And I can promise that as long as I'm alive, you'll have someone who cares about what happens to you. Rebecca looked at him with eyes that were far too old for her face, weighing his words against years of disappointment and betrayal. Finally, she nodded slightly, not full acceptance, but willingness to hope. Inside the house, Agent Kim was coordinating with her team, preparing for the most critical phone call of the investigation. David Brennan, the fake Agent Harrison, had agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. In 30 minutes, he would call Pastor Jeremiah and deliver the message that would either save 12 children or doom them all. The operation had moved beyond rescue into something larger, a coordinated effort to expose a network that had operated in shadow for years, preying on society's most vulnerable members. 7 children who had been marked for death were now the key to justice for dozens of others, as the sun touched the mountain peaks and painted the sky in brilliant orange and red. Marcus Wright stood on his porch with a 12-year-old girl who had survived hell and was now helping to dismantle it. Neither of them spoke about the irony that his planned death had led to their salvation, that their rescue had given him purpose beyond survival. Some transformations happened slowly, over months or years of gradual change. Others occurred in moments of crisis that split existence into before and after. Marcus knew he was living through one of those moments, watching his old life die and a new one be born in the space between one phone call and the next, the phone call that would determine whether 7 rescued children could help save 12 more. The phone call that would test whether justice was possible in a world where evil had learned to wear the mask of righteousness. The phone call that would prove whether hope was strong enough to overcome a harvest of innocence. The tension in Anka. The ranch house was thick enough to cut with a knife as Agent Kim prepared for the most crucial phone call of the operation. David Brennan sat at the kitchen table, his hands cuffed to the chair, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool mountain air filtering through the open windows. The fake FBI agent who had tried to eliminate 7 witnesses was now their unwilling ally in saving 12 more children. Remember, Agent Kim said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of command, you're reporting successful completion of the mission. The bodies have been disposed of, the investigation is closed, and there's no evidence linking Pastor Jeremiah to the children's disappearance. Any deviation from that script, any hint that something's wrong, and those 12 kids pay the price. Brennan nodded, his face pale. Whatever loyalty he'd once felt to Pastor, Jeremy's operation had evaporated when faced with federal charges for impersonating a law enforcement officer, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory to child trafficking. I understand. But Jeremy's not stupid if he suspects anything. He won't, Michael said firmly from his position on the living room couch. The 10-year-old had become an unofficial consultant to the FBI team, his detailed knowledge of Haven House proving invaluable. Pastor Jeremy thinks he's untouchable. He believes God protects his mission, that no earthly authority can stop him. Rebecca nodded agreement. He's arrogant. As long as you sound confident and use the right code words, he'll believe what he wants to hear. Agent Kim glanced at her watch. It's time. Remember, this call is being recorded and traced. FBI tech teams are standing by to track the signal and gather intelligence on his communication network. She placed Brennan's confiscated cell phone on the table and nodded to her technical specialist, who activated recording equipment. The ranch kitchen, which had witnessed so many family meals and quiet conversations between Marcus and Sarah, was now the focal point of a federal operation that could save or doom innocent lives. Brennan dialed the number with shaking fingers. The phone rang once, twice, then a familiar voice answered, cold, authoritative, carrying the absolute certainty of someone who believed divine authority flowed through his words. Brother David. Pastor Jeremy's voice filled the kitchen through the phone speaker. I trust your mission was successful? Harvest complete, Brennan said, his voice steadying as he fell into the familiar rhythm of reporting. All 7 packages were properly disposed of. The local authorities found nothing but empty containers and disturbed earth. They're treating it as a case of grave robbing, possibly connected to drug activity. Excellent, Pastor Jeremy replied, satisfaction evident in his tone. And the rancher? Cooperative once he understood the federal implications. He's agreed to keep the property secure and report any further disturbances. The investigation is officially closed. Marcus felt sick listening to the casual discussion of the children's supposed murders, but he forced himself to remain silent. Around the living room, 7 faces watched the phone with expressions ranging from fear to determination. They were listening to their own death being reported as a mission accomplished. God's work proceeds according to his plan, Pastor Jeremy said. The children's suffering has ended and they have found peace. Their sacrifice serves a greater purpose. About that, Brennan said, following the script Agent Kim had prepared. There's been some interest from our benefactors about accelerating the timeline. They're concerned about increased federal attention on facilities like ours. There was a pause before Pastor Jeremy responded, his voice carrying a note of suspicion. What kind of interest? Mr. Whitmore called this morning, Brennan improvised, using a name the children had provided during their intelligence gathering. He's worried about exposure, wants to finalize arrangements for the remaining inventory before moving operations out of state. Another pause, longer this time. Marcus could see Agent Kim leaning forward, her entire focus on the phone conversation that would determine the success or failure of their rescue operation. Brother David, Pastor Jeremy said slowly, Mr. Whitmore is currently in Europe on business. He won't return for another 2 weeks. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of 7 children holding their breath. Brennan's face went white as he realized his improvisation had exposed the deception. Agent Kim's hand moved to her weapon while her technical specialist frantically worked to maintain the trace. Perhaps I misunderstood, Brennan stammered. It might have been his assistant, or... No, Pastor Jeremy's voice had turned ice cold. Mr. Whitmore travels alone and never delegates sensitive communications. Who is this really? The line went dead, leaving the kitchen in shocked silence. Agent Kim immediately began barking orders into her radio, calling for immediate deployment of tactical teams, while the children stared at the silent phone with expressions of growing horror. He knows, Rebecca whispered. He knows we're alive. And he knows the authorities are involved. How long before he can evacuate? Agent Kim demanded. 30 minutes if he moves fast, Michael said, his tactical mind already calculating timelines. He has escape protocols, vehicles always fueled, important documents in a go bag, predetermined routes to safe houses. And the other children? The 7 survivors exchanged glances, their faces reflecting a shared understanding of Pastor Jeremiah's operational philosophy. Carlos answered what they all knew. He'll eliminate them. He can't risk witnesses, and he won't abandon his mission. He'll call it a final harvest and kill them all before he runs. Remember, Agent Kim said, turning to address Marcus and the children, you go in, confirm the location of the 12 children, and get out. The moment you have visual confirmation, you signal us and we move. No heroics, no attempts to rescue them yourselves. Rebecca nodded, but Marcus could see the determination in her eyes that went beyond following orders. These children had been abandoned by every adult authority in their lives: social workers, foster families, law enforcement, the courts themselves. They weren't going to rely on anyone else to save their friends. How long do we have before Pastor Jeremiah realizes something's wrong? Michael asked, checking his concealed communication device one more time. Not long, Agent Kim admitted. His security protocols are sophisticated. The moment he sees you 7, he'll know his burial plan. Failed. You'll have minutes at most before he locks down the compound and begins eliminating evidence. The vehicles slowed as they approached the perimeter of Haven House, a sprawling compound that looked exactly as the children had described, like a legitimate group home surrounded by gardens and playgrounds, with no hint of the horrors taking place within its walls. Only the subtle details betrayed its true nature: cameras mounted at strategic intervals, motion sensors disguised as decorative elements, and security lighting that could illuminate every approach. This is where we separate, Agent Kim said. Marcus, you and the children approach from the main road. Make it look like you're seeking help, a concerned guardian bringing back runaway children. We'll be watching, but we can't intervene until you confirm the location of the 12 children. Marcus looked at the 7 young faces surrounding him in the vehicle. 3 days ago, these children had been buried alive in his field. Now they were risking their lives to save others from the same fate. The courage required for such an act humbled him completely. Are you sure about this? He asked them one more time. We've never been more sure of anything, Rebecca replied, her red hair catching the moonlight as she prepared to face the man who had tried to murder her. Those children in there, they're counting on us. Just like we counted on you when we were buried in your field. The parallel struck Marcus with unexpected force. Just as he had been in the right place at the right time to hear their cries for help, they were now positioned to be the salvation for 12 others. Sometimes rescue came from the most unlikely sources: broken people, finding strength in each other's need. They left the vehicles a quarter mile from the compound and walked the remaining distance on foot. Marcus carried a backpack containing emergency medical supplies and communication equipment, while the children moved with the careful silence they had learned during months of survival. The night air was cold against their faces, carrying the scent of pine, and the distant sound of running water. Haven House appeared ahead of them, like a mirage, warm light glowing from windows, the suggestion of safety and shelter for wayward children. The irony was devastating. This place had been designed to look like salvation while functioning as a slaughterhouse. Remember, Marcus whispered as they approached the main entrance, we're here because you 7 ran away from my ranch. And I tracked you down. You're scared, cold, and ready to come home to Haven House. Make it believable. The front door opened before they could knock, revealing Sister Catherine, a thin woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that reflected no warmth despite her welcoming smile. She wore the plain dress and modest appearance of someone dedicated to religious service, but the children's descriptions had prepared Marcus for the calculating intelligence behind her facade. My goodness, Sister Catherine said, her voice carrying practiced concern. Children, what are you doing out here so late? And who is this gentleman? I'm Marcus Wright, he said, adopting the tired tone of an exasperated guardian. These kids ran away from my ranch 3 days ago. I've been tracking them across 2 counties, and they finally admitted they came from this place. Sister Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly as she studied the 7 children who should have been dead and buried. Marcus could see her mind working, calculating the implications of their appearance while maintaining her compassionate facade. How strange, she said slowly. These children left our care several days ago for a special retreat with Pastor Jeremiah. They should have been safely supervised at all times. Well, they weren't, Marcus replied. I found them sleeping in my barn, half-starved and scared out of their minds. They kept talking about someone named Pastor Jeremiah and some kind of spiritual preparation. Please, come in out of the cold, Sister Catherine said, stepping aside. To allow them entry. Pastor Jeremiah will want to speak with you personally. He's very concerned about the children's spiritual well-being. They entered the main lobby of Haven House, which looked exactly like a legitimate group home, comfortable furniture, inspirational posters on the walls, children's artwork displayed with pride. But the children's descriptions had taught Marcus to notice the details that revealed the truth. Cameras in every corner, reinforced doors with electronic locks, windows that had been sealed shut. Please wait here, Sister Catherine said, gesturing toward a seating area. I'll notify Pastor Jeremiah immediately. As she disappeared into the building's interior, Marcus caught Rebecca's eye and nodded slightly. They were inside. They had established their cover story, and now they needed to locate the 12 children before Pastor Jeremiah discovered the deception. The basement entrance is through the kitchen, Michael whispered, his voice barely audible. Down a hallway past the dining room. How do we get there without being seen? Marcus asked. Sister Catherine will want to keep us here until Pastor Jeremiah arrives, Rebecca said. But if one of us has a medical emergency. Emma immediately understood, clutching her stomach and doubling over with convincing distress. I think I'm going to be sick, she gasped loudly. I need a bathroom quickly. The performance was perfect, a frightened child with digestive problems. That required immediate attention. Sister Catherine reappeared within moments, her expression showing annoyance at the disruption of her careful plans. Of course, dear, she said through gritted teeth. The restroom is down the hall past the kitchen. Marcus stood to escort Emma, his movement natural and protective. I'll take her, he said. These kids have been through enough trauma. As they walked deeper into the building, Marcus noted the layout exactly as the children had described: long corridors with multiple rooms, each door equipped with electronic locks, controlled from a central security station. The place was designed like a prison disguised as a home. The kitchen was empty, but Marcus could hear voices from somewhere below, adult voices giving orders, children's voices responding with the fearful compliance of those who had learned. That resistance brought punishment. The basement entrance was concealed behind a door marked storage, but the electronic lock required a keycard or code. Emma pressed her ear to the door, listening intently. I can hear them, she whispered. They're down there, and they're scared. Marcus activated his concealed communication device, speaking quietly into the transmitter. Target location confirmed. Basement level, electronic security, multiple subjects present. Request immediate support. Agent Kin's voice crackled back. Copy that. Tactical teams moving to breach positions. Hold your location and prepare for. The transmission was cut off as footsteps approached from the main lobby. Pastor Jeremiah had arrived, and his presence filled the building with an aura of malevolent authority that made the children instinctively shrink against. Marcus's protective bulk. Pastor Jeremiah appeared in the kitchen doorway like a figure from a nightmare, tall, imposing, with silver hair and eyes that burned with the fervor of absolute certainty. He wore simple religious garments, but his bearing suggested someone accustomed to wielding power over life and death. "Mr. Wright," he said, his voice carrying the resonance of someone who believed himself to be God's direct representative on earth. "I understand you've brought our wayward children home." "That's right," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady, despite the evil radiating from the man before him. "Found them on my property, figured they belonged here." Pastor Jeremiah's gaze fixed on the 7 children, his expression shifting from welcome to suspicion to dawning horror as he recognized faces that should have been dead. "Impossible," he breathed. "You 7 were properly disposed of." "Brother." David confirmed the harvest was complete. The mask had dropped completely. Pastor Jeremiah was no longer pretending to be a compassionate religious leader concerned about runaway children. He was revealed as what he truly was, a predator who had just discovered that his victims had somehow escaped death itself. "Guess." "Your brother David wasn't as reliable as you thought," Marcus said, stepping protectively in front of the children. "These kids are alive, they're safe, and they're going to make sure you never hurt another child again." Pastor Jeremiah's hand moved toward his jacket, but the motion was interrupted by the sound of explosions as VI tactical teams breached entrances throughout the compound. The building shook with the force of coordinated assault, emergency lighting activated, and the sound of running feet filled the corridors. "Federal agents, everyone on the ground." The basement door's electronic lock failed as power to the security systems was cut, and Marcus wasted no time in pulling it open. The stairs descended into darkness, but he could hear children's voices, calling out in fear and confusion. "Rebecca, take the others and get out of the building," Marcus ordered. "I'm going down to get the 12 children." "We're going with you," Rebecca said firmly. "Those kids down there, they know us. They'll trust us when they won't trust strangers." Together, Marcus and the 7 survivors descended into the basement that Pastor Jeremiah had called secure storage. What they found there would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. 12 children, ages 6 to 15, chained to walls in individual cells, their eyes reflecting the broken hope of those who had learned to expect only cruelty from the adult world. "It's okay," Rebecca called out as they moved through the basement, Marcus using bolt cutters from his emergency kit to break the chains. "We're here to take you home. You're safe now." The rescue took only minutes, but each second felt like an eternity as traumatized children were freed from their underground prison. FBI agents poured into the basement, followed by medical personnel who began immediate triage and treatment. Pastor Jeremiah was found in his office, attempting to destroy computer files and paper records. His arrest was anticlimactic, a man who had wielded absolute power over helpless children reduced to a frightened criminal facing federal charges that would ensure he never saw freedom again. As dawn broke over the Colorado mountains, 19 children sat in the back of medical transport vehicles, wrapped in blankets and receiving care from specialists trained in trauma recovery. 7 who had been buried alive had saved 12 who had been marked for death, and Marcus Wright, the man who had planned to end his life just days earlier, had found a purpose that would sustain him for years to come. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked as they watched the last of the emergency vehicles disappear into the morning light. Marcus looked at the young woman who had emerged as a leader among the survivors, whose courage had inspired a rescue operation that saved lives across multiple states. "Now we build something better," he said, "all of us together." The legal battles would take months. The psychological healing would take years, but the immediate crisis was over. Evil had been exposed and defeated by the most unlikely alliance imaginable, a suicidal rancher and 7 children who refused to stay dead. And somewhere in the ruins of Haven House, investigators would find evidence of a trafficking network that had operated for years, protected by corruption and enabled by a system that had forgotten its primary mission: protecting the innocent. The 19 children who had survived would become the foundation for reforms that would prevent such horrors from happening again. Marcus Wright had gone to his field to die and instead had found 7 reasons to live. Those 7 had become 19, and 19 had become a legacy of hope that would outlive them all. Sometimes the most broken people were the ones capable of the greatest healing, and sometimes the deepest darkness was where the brightest light chose to shine. The sunrise that painted the Colorado sky in gold and crimson was not an ending, but a beginning, the first day of 19 lives reclaimed from darkness. The first day of a future built on the foundation of survivors who had chosen to save others rather than simply save themselves. Hope, Marcus learned, was not a feeling but an action. And action, taken by those who had every reason to despair, could move mountains and resurrect the dead. The Colorado autumn painted the mountains in brilliant reds and golds as Marcus stood on his front porch watching 19 children play. In the yard that had once echoed only with his own footsteps, the ranch house had been expanded over the summer additional bedrooms, a larger kitchen, a common room where homework sessions turned into storytelling circles and where nightmares could be shared and conquered together. The legal proceedings had been swift and decisive. Pastor Jeremiah faced life imprisonment without parole on charges ranging from child trafficking to attempted murder. His network of accomplices, including the corrupt judge who had tried to block the rescue, had been systematically dismantled by federal investigators who found evidence of crimes spanning multiple states and involving dozens of missing children. Sister Catherine had cooperated with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing detailed information about the trafficking operations benefactors. The wealthy clients who had visited Haven House to view inventory were now facing their own federal charges, their respectable facades stripped away to reveal the predators beneath. But for Marcus, the legal victories mattered less than the daily miracles happening in his home. Rebecca had enrolled in the local high school, where her intelligence and natural leadership had quickly earned her recognition from teachers who saw past her traumatic history to the remarkable young woman she was becoming. She still carried herself with the protective vigilance of someone who had been responsible for others' survival. But now that vigilance was tempered with the knowledge that she was truly safe, Michael had thrown himself into his studies with the focused intensity of someone making up for lost time. His notebook of tactical observations had evolved into detailed journals about their recovery process, meticulous documentation that social workers said would help other trauma survivors understand that healing was possible. At 11, he was already talking about becoming a prosecutor specializing in crimes against children. The twins, James and Daniel, had begun to separate their identities for the first time in their lives, discovering individual interests and personalities that had been suppressed by their need for survival unity. James showed an aptitude for mechanical work, spending hours in the barn helping Marcus repair equipment, while Daniel revealed an artistic talent that filled the house with drawings and paintings that gradually shifted from dark themes to brighter visions of possible futures. Carlos and Sofia had blossomed under the consistent care and attention they received. Carlos's protective instincts toward his sister had evolved into mentorship of the younger children in their extended family, while Sofia had begun speaking in full sentences again, her voice growing stronger each day as she learned to trust that her words would be heard and valued. Emma had discovered a love of reading that kept her curled up in the living room's window seat for hours at a time, consuming stories of adventure and hope with the hunger of someone who had been starved for positive narratives. Her quiet nature remained, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the contemplative peace of someone who had found her place in the world. And Lily, the youngest, had appointed herself the house's unofficial coordinator, making sure everyone had eaten breakfast, remembered their chores, and knew where to find comfort when the old fears crept back during thunderstorms or unexpected noises. The 12 children rescued from Haven House's basement had integrated into their extended family with varying degrees of success. Some had returned to biological families or been placed with carefully vetted relatives. Others had found homes with specially trained foster families who understood the complexity of their trauma. But 5 had remained at the ranch, unable to trust any environment that didn't include the 7 children, who had risked everything to save them. Marcus had undergone extensive background checks and training to become a licensed therapeutic group home provider, transforming his ranch into a legitimate sanctuary for children who had survived the worst of human cruelty. The process had been exhausting: interviews with psychologists, financial audits, home safety inspections, educational planning sessions, but every bureaucratic hurdle had been worth it to see children laughing in his yard. Maria Rodriguez had become a frequent visitor, officially serving as the children's caseworker, but functioning more like an honorary grandmother who brought cookies and wisdom in equal measure. She had been instrumental in navigating the legal complexities of Marcus's guardianship arrangements, fighting through red tape with the tenacity of someone who had seen too many children lost to systemic failures. "Dinner's ready," Rebecca called from the kitchen, her voice carrying the easy authority of someone who had found her place as both child and helper in their unconventional household. The evening meal had become sacred time for their family, a chance for everyone to share their day, voice concerns, celebrate victories, and maintain the connections that kept them anchored to safety. Marcus gathered the children from their various activities, watching as they filtered into the dining room with the comfortable familiarity of those who belonged somewhere. The large table that Sarah had insisted on so many years ago was finally fulfilling its intended purpose, surrounded by young voices and filled with the kind of warm chaos that made a house into a home. "Before we eat," Rebecca said, raising her glass of milk and a toast that had become their evening tradition, "let's remember why we're here." "Because somebody cared enough to dig us up," Michael said, his words carrying the weight of literal truth that never lost its power. "Federal agents, everyone on the ground." The basement door's electronic lock failed as power to the security systems was cut, and Marcus wasted no time in pulling it open. The stairs descended into darkness, but he could hear children's voices, calling out in fear and confusion. "Rebecca, take the others and get out of the building," Marcus ordered. "I'm going down to get the 12 children." "We're going with you," Rebecca said firmly. "Those kids down there, they know us. They'll trust us when they won't trust strangers." Together, Marcus and the 7 survivors descended into the basement that Pastor Jeremiah had called secure storage. What they found there would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life: 12 children, ages 6 to 15, chained to walls in individual cells, their eyes reflecting the broken hope of those who had learned to expect only cruelty from the adult world. "It's okay," Rebecca called out as they moved through the basement, Marcus using bolt cutters from his emergency kit to break the chains. "We're here to take you home. You're safe now." The rescue took only minutes, but each second felt like an eternity as traumatized children were freed from their underground prison. FBI agents poured into the basement, followed by medical personnel who began immediate triage and treatment. Pastor Jeremiah was found in his office, attempting to destroy computer files and paper records. His arrest was anticlimactic: a man who had wielded absolute power over helpless children reduced to a frightened criminal facing federal charges that would ensure he never saw freedom again. As dawn broke over the Colorado mountains, 19 children sat in the back of medical transport vehicles, wrapped in blankets and receiving care from specialists trained in trauma recovery. 7 who had been buried alive had saved 12 who had been marked for death, and Marcus Wright, the man who had planned to end his life just days earlier, had found a purpose that would sustain him for years to come. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked as they watched the last of the emergency vehicles disappear into the morning light. Marcus looked at the young woman who had emerged as a leader among the survivors. whose courage had inspired a rescue operation that saved lives across multiple states. "Now we build something better," he said, "all of us together." The legal battles would take months, the psychological healing would take years, but the immediate crisis was over. Evil had been exposed and defeated by the most unlikely alliance imaginable: a suicidal rancher and 7 children who refused to stay dead. And somewhere in the ruins of Haven House, investigators would find evidence of a trafficking network that had operated for years, protected by corruption and enabled by a system that had forgotten its primary mission: protecting the innocent. The 19 children who had survived would become the foundation for reforms that would prevent such horrors from happening again. Marcus Wright had gone to his field to die and instead had found 7 reasons to live. Those 7 had become 19, and 19 had become a legacy of hope that would outlive them all. Sometimes the most broken people were the ones capable of the greatest healing, and sometimes the deepest darkness was where the brightest light chose to shine. The sunrise that painted the Colorado sky in gold and crimson was not an ending, but a beginning, the first day of 19 lives reclaimed from darkness. The first day of a future built on the foundation of survivors who had chosen to save others rather than simply save themselves. Hope, Marcus learned, was not a feeling but an action. And action, taken by those who had every reason to despair, could move mountains and resurrect the dead. The Colorado autumn painted the mountains in brilliant reds and golds as Marcus stood on his front porch watching 19 children play in the yard that had once echoed only with his own footsteps. The ranch house had been expanded over the summer additional bedrooms, a larger kitchen, a common room where homework sessions turned into storytelling circles and where nightmares could be shared and conquered together. The legal proceedings had been swift and decisive. Pastor Jeremiah faced life imprisonment without parole on charges ranging from child trafficking to attempted murder. His network of accomplices, including the corrupt judge who had tried to block the rescue, had been systematically dismantled by federal investigators who found evidence of crimes spanning multiple states and involving dozens of missing children. Sister Catherine had cooperated with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing detailed information about the trafficking operation's benefactors. The wealthy clients who had visited Haven House to view inventory were now facing their own federal charges, their respectable facades stripped away to reveal the predators beneath. But for Marcus, the legal victories mattered less than the daily miracles happening in his home. Rebecca had enrolled in the local high school, where her intelligence and natural leadership had quickly earned her recognition from teachers who saw past her traumatic history to the remarkable young woman she was becoming. She still carried herself with the protective vigilance of someone who had been responsible for others' survival. But now that vigilance was tempered with the knowledge that she was truly safe, Michael had thrown himself into his studies with the focused intensity of someone making up for lost time. His notebook of tactical observations had evolved into detailed journals about their recovery process, meticulous documentation that social workers said would help other trauma survivors understand that healing was possible. At 11, he was already talking about becoming a prosecutor specializing in crimes against children. The twins, James and Daniel, had begun to separate their identities for the first time in their lives, discovering individual interests and personalities that had been suppressed by their need for survival unity. James showed an aptitude for mechanical work, spending hours in the barn helping Marcus repair equipment, while Daniel revealed an artistic talent that filled the house with drawings and paintings that gradually shifted from dark themes to brighter visions of possible futures. Carlos and Sofia had blossomed under the consistent care and attention they received. Carlos's protective instincts toward his sister had evolved into mentorship of the younger children in their extended family, while Sofia had begun speaking in full sentences again, her voice growing stronger each day as she learned to trust that her words would be heard and valued. Emma had discovered a love of reading that kept her curled up in the living room's window seat for hours at a time, consuming stories of adventure and hope with the hunger of someone who had been starved. For positive narratives, her quiet nature remained, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the contemplative peace of someone who had found her place in the world. And Lily, the youngest, had appointed herself the house's unofficial coordinator, making sure everyone had eaten breakfast, remembered their chores, and knew where to find comfort when the old fears crept back during thunderstorms or unexpected noises. The 12 children rescued from Haven House's basement had integrated into their extended family with varying degrees of success. Some had returned to biological families or been placed with carefully vetted relatives. Others had found homes with specially trained foster families who understood the complexity of their trauma. But 5 had remained at the ranch, unable to trust any environment that didn't include the 7 children, who had risked everything to save them. Marcus had undergone extensive background checks and training to become a licensed therapeutic group home provider, transforming his ranch into a legitimate sanctuary for children who had survived the worst of human cruelty. The process had been exhausting: interviews with psychologists, financial audits, home safety inspections, educational planning sessions, but every bureaucratic hurdle had been worth it to see children laughing in his yard. Maria Rodriguez had become a frequent visitor, officially serving as the children's caseworker, but functioning more like an honorary grandmother who brought cookies and wisdom in equal measure. She had been instrumental in navigating the legal complexities of Marcus's guardianship arrangements, fighting through red tape with the tenacity of someone who had seen too many children lost to systemic failures. "Dinner's ready," Rebecca called from the kitchen, her voice carrying the easy authority of someone who had found her place as both child and helper in their unconventional household. The evening meal had become sacred time for their family, a chance for everyone to share their day, voice concerns, celebrate victories, and maintain the connections that kept them anchored to safety. Marcus gathered the children from their various activities, watching as they filtered into the dining room with the comfortable familiarity of those who belonged somewhere. The large table that Sarah had insisted on so many years ago was finally fulfilling its intended purpose, surrounded by young voices and filled with the kind of warm chaos that made a house into a home. "Before we eat," Rebecca said, raising her glass of milk and a toast that had become their evening tradition, "let's remember why we're here." "Because somebody cared enough to dig us up," Michael said, his words carrying the weight of literal truth that never lost its power. "Because we refused to stay buried," added Carlos, his arm around Sophia, who nodded in agreement. "Because we found each other," whispered Emma, her voice stronger now but still carrying the gentleness that made her words precious. "Because families aren't just blood," said James, with Daniel finishing the thought. "They're people who choose to save each other." "Because even the darkest places can't stop light from growing," Lily added, her 5-year-old wisdom distilled from experiences no child should survive. Marcus raised his own glass, looking around the table at faces that had been marked for death but had chosen life instead. Because sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a better one. They drank their toast and began the evening meal, conversation flowing around topics both mundane and profound. Homework assignments mixed with discussions of nightmares and coping strategies. Plans for weekend activities blended with processing. Sessions about court testimony and healing milestones. After dinner, as the children dispersed to complete homework and evening chores, Marcus found himself alone in the kitchen with Rebecca, who had stayed behind to help with dishes despite his insistence that she didn't need to. "I've been thinking about college," she said suddenly, scrubbing a plate with more attention than it required. "There are programs for kids like us survivors who want to work in child protection, social services, law enforcement." Marcus felt a familiar mixture of pride and protective anxiety. Rebecca was 16 now, her intelligence and resilience preparing her for a future that had once seemed impossible. but the thought of her leaving their sanctuary to face a world that had failed her so completely brought back all his fears about her safety. "You've got time to decide," he said carefully. "No need to rush into anything." Rebecca smiled, seeing through his attempt to delay the inevitable. "Marcus, I can't stay here forever. None of us can. We survived because we learned to fight for something bigger than ourselves. Now we need to take that fight to the world." Her words echoed conversations happening throughout the house as the older children began planning for futures that extended beyond the ranch's protective boundaries. Michael talked about law school, Carlos about social work, Emma about becoming a teacher who could recognize and help troubled children. They were growing up, these kids who had been given back their lives through a combination of chance, courage, and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The safe haven that Marcus had created for them was meant to be temporary, a place to heal and grow strong enough to face the world again. "What about you?" Rebecca asked, turning the question back on him. "What do you want to do when we're all grown up and making our own way?" Marcus considered the question as he dried dishes and put them away in cabinets that had been empty for too long. A year ago, his future had been measured in minutes, the time it would take to walk to the oak tree and end his suffering. Now it stretched ahead with possibilities he was still learning to imagine. "I think I'll keep doing this," he said finally. "There are always more kids who need somewhere safe to land, more children who need someone to believe they're worth saving. And someone to dig them up when they're buried alive?" Rebecca asked with a smile that mixed darkness and light in equal measure. "Literally or metaphorically," Marcus replied. "Whatever it takes." As the evening wound down and the children prepared for sleep, Marcus made his nightly rounds checking locks not out of fear but out of care, ensuring everyone had what they needed for peaceful rest, being available for the conversations that came easier in darkness than daylight. He found Lily sitting by her bedroom window, looking out at the mountains that had witnessed her rescue and her healing. She had grown taller over the months, her dark curls now long enough for the elaborate braids that Rebecca styled each morning, but she still carried the stuffed rabbit that Maria Rodriguez had brought her during those first frightening days. "Can't sleep?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair beside her window. "I'm not scared," Lily said quickly, then reconsidered. "Well, maybe a little. But it's a different kind of scared than before." "What kind?" "The kind where you're scared about good things going away instead of scared about bad things happening." Her 5-year-old philosophy had a clarity that often surpassed adult understanding. "I'm scared about forgetting this feeling of being safe." Marcus nodded, understanding the fear that safety itself might be temporary, that the peace they had found could disappear as suddenly as it had arrived. "You know what I learned?" he said. "The feeling doesn't live in the place. It lives in the people. As long as we remember how to take care of each other, we carry safety with us wherever we go." Lily considered this, her small face serious in the moonlight that streamed through her window. "Even when I'm grown up and live somewhere else?" "Especially then. Because you'll know how to recognize other people who need to be safe, and you'll know how to help them find what we found here." She nodded solemnly, then surprised him by reaching out to take his hand. "Marcus, thank you for digging us up." The simple words carried the weight of everything they had survived together, the literal rescue from underground graves, the metaphorical resurrection from lives that had been declared worthless, the daily work of building trust and healing trauma and learning to hope again. "Thank you for calling out loud enough for me to hear," he replied, squeezing her small hand gently. Later, as Marcus sat in his study reviewing the day's therapy notes and planning documents, he found himself looking at the framed photograph on his desk, not the old picture of him and Sarah, though that remained in its place of honor, but a new one taken just last month. 19 children and one middle-aged rancher arranged around the oak tree that had once been his intended site of death and had become their symbol of resurrection. The tree had grown new branches over the summer, green shoots reaching toward The sky with the persistent optimism of nature that refuses to accept defeat. In the photograph, the children were clustered around its massive trunk, their faces bright with the kind of joy that comes after surviving the unthinkable. Marcus had learned something important during their months together. Healing wasn't a destination but a daily choice, made again and again by people who decided that hope was worth the risk of disappointment. 7 children had made that choice when they climbed out of underground graves. 12 more had made it when they chose to trust the voices calling them to freedom. And Marcus had made it every morning when he chose to get up and care for 19. Lives that had become more precious to him than his own. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but no longer empty. Some of the children would leave for college, careers, families of their own. Others would stay longer, needing more time to heal and grow. New children would probably arrive broken kids who needed someone to believe they were worth saving, worth fighting for, worth the patient work of resurrection. Marcus Wright, who had once measured his life in hours remaining, now measured it in lives touched, futures made possible, and the exponential mathematics of hope shared between people who had learned that family was a choice rather than an accident of birth. Outside his study window, the Colorado mountains stood eternal against the star-filled sky, witnesses to human suffering and human resilience in equal measure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose healing over harm, connection over isolation, life over death. But tonight, 19 children slept safely under his roof, their dreams no longer haunted by underground darkness, but filled with the possibility of light. And that, Marcus knew, was exactly how miracles were supposed to work, not as dramatic interventions that changed everything at once, but as daily choices that accumulated into transformation, one moment, one breath, one saved life at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.